young English sailor seized with an ardent longing to return to his country, escaped from a depot and succeeded in making his way to the seacoast in the neighborhood of Bologna, where he concealed himself in the woods. His eager desire to return home suggested to him the idea of making a little boat to enable him to reach some of the English cruisers, which he spent the greater part of the day in watching from the tops of the trees on the seashore. He was seized just at the moment when he was about to put to sea with his little boat, and to make a desperate attempt to secure his liberty, he was imprisoned on suspicion of being a spy or a robber. This circumstance reached the ears of Napoleon, who was then at Bologna, and he felt a curiosity to see the boat, of which he heard so much. When it was shown to him, he could not bring himself to believe that any rational being would have ventured to put to sea with it. He ordered the sailor to be brought to him. And the young man declared that he had really intended to escape with the aid of his boat, and the only favor he asked was permission to execute his project. "You appear very eager to return to England," said the emperor. "Perhaps you have left a sweetheart behind you?" "No," replied the young man, "but I have a mother at home who is old and infirm, and I'm anxious to return to her." "Well, you shall return," said Napoleon, and he immediately ordered the young man should be provided with new clothes and sent on board the first English cruiser that might appear in sight. He also directed that he should be provided with a sum of money as a present to his mother, remarking that she must be a good mother to have so good a son. Among the many acts of kindness which the emperor exercised towards the English who were detained in France, there is one which happened to come within my knowledge, and of which a Mr. Manning was the object. This gentleman, whom I knew very well in Paris, and who had been induced to travel for the sake of scientific investigation, thought he might obtain his liberty by addressing a petition to Napoleon, praying for permission to visit the interior of Asia. His friends laughed at his simplicity, but he turned the laugh against us when, at the expiration of a few weeks, he triumphantly informed us of the success of his application. I find it mentioned in Dr. O'Meara's work that this same Mr. Manning, after a peregrination of several years, touched at St. Helena on his return to Europe and urgently requested leave to see Napoleon in order to express his gratitude by laying a few presents at his feet and answering any inquiries he might make respecting the Grand Lama, whom he had had an opportunity of visiting through the emperor's indulgence. The 6th, the emperor continued in a state of convalescence, and he received some visitors about the middle of the day. I waited upon him, accompanied by Madame de Montallon. He conversed a great deal about the society of Paris and related several anecdotes of the Tuileries. In the evening, the emperor again resumed his geographical observations. He dwelt particularly on Asia, on the situation of Russia, and the facility with which the latter power might make an attempt on India, or even on China, and the alarm which she might therefore justly excite in the English. He calculated the number of troops that Russia might employ, their probable point of departure, the route they would be likely to pursue, and the wealth they would obtain in such an enterprise. On all these subjects he made the most curious and valuable remarks. I very much regret my inability to record them here, for my notes in this instance afford me only slight hints, and I cannot trust to the accuracy of my memory in filling up the details. The emperor next adverted to the superiority of Russia over the rest of Europe in regard to the immense powers she might call up for the purpose of invasion, together with the physical advantages of her situation under the pole, and backed by external bulwarks of ice, which in case of need would render her inaccessible. Russia, he said, could only be attacked during 1/3 or 1/4 of the year, while on the contrary she might, throughout the whole 12 months, maintain attacks upon us. Her assailants would encounter the rigors and privations of a frigid climate and a barren soil, while her troops, pouring down upon us, would enjoy the fertility and charms of our southern region. To these physical circumstances, continued the emperor, may be added the advantages of an immense population, brave, hardy, devoted, and passive, including those numerous uncivilized hordes to whom privation and wandering are the natural state of existence. Who can avoid shuddering, said he, at the thought of such a vast mass, unassailable either on the flanks or in the rear, descending upon us with impunity, if triumphant, overwhelming everything in its course, or if defeated, retiring amidst the cold and desolation that may be called its force of reserve, and possessing every facility of issuing forth again at a future opportunity. Is not this the head of the Hydra, the Aeneas of fable, which can only be subdued by seizing it boldly and stifling it in the embrace? But where is the Hercules to be found? France alone could think of such an achievement, and it must be confessed we made but an awkward attempt at it. The emperor was of opinion that in the new political combination of Europe, the fate of that portion of the world depended entirely on the capacity and disposition of a single man. Should there arise, said he, an emperor of Russia, valiant, impetuous, and intelligent, and a word, a czar with a beard on his chin, this he pronounced very emphatically. Europe is his own. He may commence his operations in the German territory at 100 leagues from the two capitals, Berlin and Vienna, whose sovereigns are his only obstacles. His secure the alliance of the one by a single stroke. He then finds himself in the heart of Germany, amidst the princes of the second rank, most of whom are either his relations or dependents. In the meanwhile, he may, should he think it necessary, throw a few firebrands across the Alps on the soil of Italy, ripe for the explosion, and he may then march triumphantly to Paris to proclaim himself the new liberator. I know if I were in such a situation, I would undertake to reach Calais in a given time, and by regular marching stations there to become the master and arbiter of Europe. Then after a few moments' silence, he added, perhaps, my dear Lascazes, you may be tempted to say, as the minister of Pyrrhus said to his master, and after all, to what purpose? My answer is to establish a new state of society and to avert great misfortunes. This is a blessing which Europe expects and solicits. The old system's ended, and the new one is not consolidated, and will not be so until after long and furious convulsions. The emperor was again silent, and after measuring with his compasses the distances on the map, he observed that Constantinople was from her situation calculated to be the center and seat of universal dominion. He then alluded to the English settlements in India and asked me whether I knew anything of their history. I told him what little I knew on this subject. Queen Elizabeth created an East India Company by virtue of her royal prerogative. A century later, the Parliament created another one. However, as these two companies were found to be injurious to each other by the competitions, they were united under one charter. In 1716, the company obtained from the new sovereigns of India the famous Firman or Indian Charter, authorizing them to export or import free of all duty. In 1741, the company first commenced military interference in the affairs of India in opposition to the French company, who took the adverse side. Since then, the two nations have constantly waged war in that distant land. Whenever a contest arose between them in Europe, the French had a short interval of success. In the War of 1740, suffered severe defeats. In 1755, maintained a footing of equality. In 1779, and at length were utterly subdued during the Revolutionary War. The English East India Company now commands the whole peninsula, including a population of more than 60 million, of which 20 million are its subjects, 20 million its tributaries or allies, and the rest are involved in its system and obliged to go with it, such as the famous East India Company, which at once acts the part of merchant and sovereign, whose wealth is derived both from commercial profits and territorial revenues. Hence, it results that the merchant is frequently actuated by the ambition of the sovereign, whilst the sovereign plans, directs, and executed with the cupidity of the merchant. In these particular circumstances, in this twofold character, we may trace the cause of the progress, measures, conflicts, contradictions, disorders, and clamors that compose the history of this celebrated company. The English East India Company long reigned absolute and independent. It was was and still continues to be represented by a court of directors chosen from amongst its proprietors. These directors delegate and direct in India by dispatches of regency or council consisting of a governor and some assessors who represent and exercise the sovereign authority. In 1767, the Crown for the first time set forward claims on the territory and revenues of India, but the company purchased its desistance by a subsidy equivalent to 10 or 12 millions of francs. About the year 1773, the East India Company, finding its affairs extremely deranged, made application to Parliament, which took advantage of its embarrassment to secure its dependence. The company's possessions were subjected to new political, judicial, and financial regulations, which, however, produced no very satisfactory result. The Indian Peninsula was thrown into the utmost degree of disorder, and the establishment of a Supreme Court of Justice operating as a rival to the Sovereign Council and appointed for the purpose of introducing English laws in the country, particularly excited the dissatisfaction and alarm of the natives. The fury of parties and their reciprocal accusations and complaints transmitted to us a picture of the odious measures, the boundless rapacity, and atrocious tyranny of this stormy period, which is the least honorable in the history of the East India Company. In 1783, with the view of providing a radical remedy for these evils, Mr. Fox, who was then Prime Minister, brought forward his famous bill, the failure of which occasioned him to quit the ministry. Mr. Pitt, who had been the opponent of this bill, in the following year introduced another, which laid the foundation of his celebrity, and which still continues to regulate the affairs of the East India Company. Fox's bill would, in fact, have been a judicial seizure. It would have placed all the company's property in the hands of a managing committee who were to liquidate its debts and dispose of all employments. The members of this committee, appointed by the king or by Parliament, were to be irremovable, and were to sit until they should have established the affairs of the company on a better footing. A general outcry was raised against these propositions, which it was said would place important interests, vast patronage, and enormous influence in the hands of a few individuals. It was said that the bill was calculated to introduce a fourth power in the state and to set up a rival to the crown itself. Mr. Fox was even accused of a wish to establish himself permanently in office by creating a sort of concealed sovereignty superior to that of the king. For Fox, being at this time minister and having Parliament under his control, he would have appointed and ruled the proposed committee. Through the influence of this committee, he would have composed and governed Parliament, and with the aid of Parliament, he would have established and perpetuated the committee, ensured there was no end to the power which he would thus have exercised. A violent clamor arose, and the king made the business a personal matter. He appealed to his own friends and to those individuals in the House of Peers who were sincerely attached to him and regarded the measures proposed as an attack on his very existence. The bill failed, and Fox quitted the ministry. Pitt was more adroit and assumed the appearance of greater moderation. In his bill, he merely contented himself with placing the company under a sort of guardianship, submitting all its operations to a committee appointed to revise and countersign them. He left to the company the power of nomination to all employments, but he reserved to the crown the appointment of the governor general and the veto on all other nominations. This committee, which was appointed by the king, formed a new branch in the administration. Complaints are now raised against the vast increase of influence which this measure would afford to the royal authority, and which it was affirmed would infallibly break the constitutional equilibrium. Fox had been reproached for having wished to keep this influence wholly apart from the king, and Pitt was accused of having placed it entirely in his hands. All that the one had wished to do for the people, it was said the other had done for the monarch. Indeed, these two distinct characters, these two opposite evils, constituted the whole difference between the two bills, which produced a decisive battle between the Whigs and Tories. Mr. Pitt gained the victory, and the Tories triumphed. The faults of Fox's bill still remain hypothetical, since they were never put to the test, but the evils that were predicted from Pitt's measures have been formally fully fulfilled. The equilibrium of power has been broken. The true English constitution has ceased to exist. The royal authority, daily augmented, has encroached in every direction and is now marching unimpeded on the high road to arbitrary and absolute power. The ministers command in Parliament a majority which they have themselves created, which perpetuates their power and legalizes their arbitrary measures. Thus, English liberty is daily more and more fettered by the very forms which were intended for its defense, and the future, instead of affording a prospect of remedy, appears to threaten greater misfortunes. How could Fox's plan have produced more fatal results? For it may truly be said that all the great encroachments that have been made on the English Constitution have been occasioned by the interests of India. Surely the weight which Fox wished to secure to the popular side could not have been more disastrous to the cause of liberty than that which Pitt surcharged the royal prerogative. Consequently, it is now often boldly asserted that Fox was in the right, that he was wiser, and could not have been so mischievous as his rival. The names of Pitt and Fox having been thus introduced, the emperor dwelt long on the characters, systems, and measures of those two celebrated statesmen, and concluded with the following remarks, which had already fallen from him on several previous occasions. Pitt said he was master of European policy. He held in his hand the moral fate of nations, but he made an ill use of his power. He kindled the fire of discord throughout the universe, and his name, like that of Aristotle, will be inscribed in history amidst flames, lamentations, and tears. The first sparks of our revolution, then the resistance that was opposed to the national will, and finally the hard crimes that ensued, all were his work. 25 years of universal conflagration, the numerous coalitions that added fuel to the flame, the revolution and devastation of Europe, the bloodshed of nations, the frightful debt of England, by which all these horrors were maintained, the pestilential system of loans, by which the people of Europe are oppressed, the general discontent that now prevails, all must be attributed to Pitt. Posterity will brand him as a scourge, and the man so lauded in his own time will hereafter be regarded as the genius of evil. Not that I consider him to have been willfully atrocious or doubt his having entertained the conviction that he was acting right, but St. Bartholomew had also its conscientious advocates. The Pope and Cardinals celebrated it by a Te Deum, and we have no reason to doubt their having done so in perfect sincerity, such is the weakness of human reason and judgment. But that for which posterity will above all execrate the memory of Pitt is a hateful school that he has left behind him, its insolent Machiavellism, its profound immorality, its cold egotism, and its utter disregard of justice and human happiness, whether it be the effect of admiration and gratitude or the result of mere instinct and sympathy. Pitt is and will continue to be the idol of the European aristocracy. There was indeed a touch of the Scylla in his character. His system has kept the popular cause in check and brought about the triumph of the patricians. As to Fox, one must not look for his model among the ancients. He is himself a model, and his principles will sooner or later rule the world. The emperor said a great deal about Fox and expressed the great attachment he entertained for him. He had had his bust put up at Malmaison before he knew him personally. He concluded with the remark, which he used often to make at different times and in various ways. Certainly, said he, the death of Fox was one of the fatalities of my career. Had his life been prolonged, affairs would have taken a totally different turn. The cause of the people would have triumphed, and we should have established a new order of things in Europe. Returning to the subject of the East India Company, the emperor observed that the question respecting the comparative advantage of the monopoly of the company or the free trade for all was an important subject of consideration. A company, said he, places great advantages in the hands of a few individuals who may attend very well to their own interests, while they neglect those of the mass. Thus, every company soon degenerates into an oligarchy. It is always the friend of power, to which it is ready to lend every assistance. In this point of view, companies were exclusively suited to old times. and old systems. Free trade, on the contrary, is favorable to the interests of all classes. It excites the imagination and arouses the activity of a people. It is identical with equality and naturally leads to independence. In this respect, it is most in unison with our modern system.